Oh my goodness. Today is the day when all of your problems are going to go away. I'm just saying, pay close attention. We have Chantel Barber. Chantel, what are you going to do today?
So, the problem that we sometimes have when we're painting from a reference photo is it becomes lifeless and dull. Our paintings lose all that vitality. Today, I'm going to show you my solution, how I work to create emotion in our paintings, energy, vitality, and bring them to life on your canvas.
Oh, I'm so excited about that. This happens to me all the time. As a matter of fact, I was having a conversation last night with an artist friend, and I was talking about how I had to paint this painting for a birthday present, and I used a reference photo, which I rarely ever do. I like to paint from studies that I've done from life. And I got the painting done and I thought it's awful. And I had to go back and say, okay, how would I give this life and how would I make this feel like it had more energy? So I'm really looking forward to this segment today. Well, why don't we get this show officially started?
It's Art School Live with Eric Rose.
Okay, well, we are so excited to have you here today. And Chantel Barber is going to teach you how to take a photo reference to make a painting and give it life. And she's an incredible painter. And you want to see some of her work. Let's show a little bit of her work right now. And here, let's show here. Let's look at that. I mean, that to me looks like 𝗖𝗵𝗵𝗁𝗍𝗵. I mean, that is so spectacular. And it's got just great energy. See how these things have such life and vibrancy? We're going to learn how to do that today. We're going to use a reference photo and we're going to get this started. So, Chantel, let's take it away.
All right. Well, what I've done is I've got a little bit of a beginning on my painting,
I'll
and
tell you what, let's show the reference image in full. Okay, so this is the reference image you used.
yes.
And now you've already kind of laid in some foundational stuff here. Can you explain what you've done here?
What I like to do when I take my reference photos, I always work from a model. And I take my own reference photos so that I can remember the emotion, I can remember the colors and the energy. So the important thing to start off with is to get some of these proportions correct. Even though I've changed the face a bit, I want to have that feeling that was in the original reference photo, the feeling of the head looking forward. It needs to be believable. So I've gone ahead, I've got everything set down, and now I get to come back in and do some wonderful brushwork and loosen things up and create more of that feeling of energy and movement that I want to have in this piece.
It's got a lot of energy and movement now. So
It does.
So this is actually also going to be a lesson in kind of how to finish a painting because
Yes,
you're going to fuss with it and change it and move it around and this is exciting.
I
Now
am.
we're going to get the
Now,
question, what are you painting on? It looks like it's a board.
it's a panel,
It's a
and
panel.
it's a cotton polyester blend panel. And I
Okay.
love it because it has a fabric feel, but it also has the support so that when I'm not only using the brush, but I also tend to love painting with these spatulas and things that I really need a surface that's going to hold up to my being rough with it, to wiping paint off, putting paint back on. And that's why I like panels.
And today you're painting in what medium?
I'm painting in acrylic and I'm using heavy body acrylic. I've also got a few open acrylics just in case I want to create some effects that the open lends itself to.
So open acrylics are slower drying acrylics for
They're
everybody's
slower
reference.
drying.
And we're excited you're going to be on Acrylic Live. We'll talk about that later. Okay, let's go ahead
Yeah.
and get into this.
All right. Well, one thing I wanted to show, a great tip, sometimes is to put blue tape on your painting surface. The reason I've done that is to give myself an idea of what if I start creating some strokes going this direction? How would that look? And then I want to extend some strokes out this way. So what I'm going to do now is pick up some white paint because I already have that really light blue in the background. And I'm going to start just to create some directional strokes.
And why do you want directional strokes?
I want this movement of horizontal because we've already got quite a bit of vertical here. And that's going to help move the eye around. It's going to give me an opportunity to create some of these harder edges because I have a lot of soft edges in this piece already. And when I put this down, the other thing I like to do is come in, I'm using a filbert brush, but then I can come in and I can have a paper towel that has just enough moisture on it to where I can feather some of these strokes out. And already you can see how that creates these wonderful wispy edges along with some of the harder edges that are helping define and bringing the viewer right into the face. The next thing I want to do is pull some of these darker colors back up on my brush and work some directional strokes into this hair here. But yet as I lay those down, once again, I like to come back in, and whether it's using a paper towel or using a spatula, create this sense of movement and motion. And down here, I'm going to do something that pulls in a hint of light. So I've just made a few notations with the brush, and then I can come back in and I can see if I like that. A lot of what I do is putting some strokes down and seeing if it's working. If it's not working, the great thing about acrylic is you can lift some of these strokes back up before it dries.
Yeah.
And you can change it, and you're not hurting the integrity of what is already here.
Yeah. You
That's
can
one
also
of the
paint
reasons I
over it if
love
you
that.
have to, right?
You can paint over it. There's several ways to change the acrylic around. I want to show some acrylic inks and how I work with acrylic ink. So the acrylic ink is just in a bottle like this, and you can either apply it directly to your canvas and let it kind of drip, or you
Oh,
can
how fun.
use a brush. Now, I let it drip for a few minutes, or not few minutes, few sec, not even a second, just enough to let it start to get that drip feel. And you can see how wonderful, once again, you're getting some really nice effects, and it's helping to shape what's going on there. And
So
because
do you
it's
have
going to
acrylic
dry,
inks in all the different colors, or do you just use
I
one particular?
do. I
Nice.
have, this one is actually a mixture of titanium white with cerulean blue, because what that does is it gives you a very cool light that I can work with. And then I can come back in with my paint and work into that ink so that it's creating a variety of mark making effects.
Hmm.
It's also nice to have transparent colors. This is a transparent orange that gives me, it's going to create this sense of light in this painting, but because it's got that orange, it's not going to feel like it's washed out. It's
All right.
creating this wonderful vibrant.
If you guys just tuned in, our guest today is Chantel Barber. She's painting in acrylic. She's showing you how to take a photo reference and create a very energetic painting so it doesn't look like a photograph. All right. So, and we're just getting started because she had this painting kind of already done for the first stage in the beginning. Chantel's going to be teaching on acrylic live. We're excited about that. If you are watching and you're first timer, say so in the comments. And if you're wherever you're watching from, go into the comments, say so. I see London, England. Welcome.
So the fun thing about using a blade like this, acrylic, once you lay it down, you can pick passages back up again and create some great transparency. And I like doing that with any kind of silicone blade that lets you have not only a opaque passage like I have here, but also creating some transparency that lets this under texture show through. And that is a really nice thing when you're wanting to build layers. And part of creating something that's vibrant is building layers in your piece. You also can come in, and we want to bump up, I want to bump up some of these lights and darks. And that's a great way to add energy to your piece, is decide where you want to have your darker darks and your lightest lights, and not use those right from the beginning. Keep it in mind that acrylic always dries one value darker. So when I come up here, I like to wait towards the end, or as I'm getting towards the end, to come in and decide really where I want to chisel some of these darker darks after I've given it the environment to where it's able to not overwhelm the face. And it's going to, as it dries, it's going to go darker, but this is allowing some more definition in this piece.
So your reference photo, the right side of her face is pretty dark. And I want to point out that this is what photos do, is they make things darker than they actually appear in life.
Yes, and that is so true. And you can lose the vitality in your piece when you rely too much on your reference photo for those darks, because as I said before, the acrylic's going to dry darker anyway. So if you come in here and you start looking at your reference photo and you see how dark this side of the face is, and then you start going with your darks, before you know it, they've dried so dark that you've lost this feeling of energy that you started off with.
Hello, Norway. Hello, Italy. Welcome. Hello, Alberta. So you guys put things in the chat, then I can tell everybody where you're watching from.
So I'm still working with a filbert brush. And you notice when I lay strokes down, I lay them down and I leave them for a moment as I look at how the whole thing's developing and then decide if I need to go back and add anything more. And I lay down very bold strokes. That's the other key. When you want to create something that has life, you can't put a stroke down and mess with it too much. However, there are these edges. Acrylic, when it dries, it's got harder edges. And so I will come back in and I will just softly adjust the very edge of a dark that I put in so that it's going to transition and not have too much of a sharpness to it. But you want, when you lay down a stroke, it's this idea of approaching your canvas with vim, vigor, and vitality, and putting it down and not coming back and messing with it too much until you have a really good idea of if it's working or not.
Right.
So when I paint in the studio, or even if I'm painting outside in life, I like to have a mirror that I can use and double check when I'm painting in the mirror to see how is it reading. And that's helping me look at how this whole composition is taking place. So I'm laying down strokes. I'm wanting to be careful that I don't take away too much of what's underneath. It's nice to have a really beautiful contrast between thick and thin passages of paint. So even though I just laid this down here, I'm going to lift some of that up because I don't want to take away too much. I don't want to lose this lovely transparency that I have going on in here. And I just want a little bit of that color to catch. So it's the way I like to work on a painting like this is go back and forth, put bold strokes down, come and lift some of those strokes up, then go back and put bold strokes down again.
Nice.
And I've been watching how this is developing and deciding, I feel like I want to start to bring something down this way because we don't want this idea of a floating head. And it's what I love again about working with the acrylic medium is I can put something down. If I like it, great, I can go with it. If it's not working, I have so many different options of either wiping it off because again, all of this has completely dried. I'm not going to affect the integrity of my panel underneath. I also have the ability to work with several different types of acrylic. I've already shown you the heavy body. I did one of the acrylic inks. Now I want to show this is open acrylic. I've got a panel here with my open acrylic. And what I'm going to do is put some of the open acrylic on my catalyst blade, and I'm going to use a thinner for it. And I only use thinners when I'm working with open acrylic. I don't do it any other way. I put the thinner on my blade, and it lets me put this paint on, and it becomes real. It's allowing the viscosity. It's moving around, and again, creating this feeling of airiness with the paint and more of a transparency, even though it's a beautiful white, it's still giving me that transparency of these colors peeking through underneath. And a lot of the painting that you're working with depends on making these mark making things and not getting so tight that you are worried about coming back in and not being bold to make strokes with what your reference is. So feeling like, well, you know, if my photograph has something very defined, I need to keep it defined, or I can't add something that's not in the photograph. And that's not the case at all. Even just adding a little bit of the light up here gives a beautiful sense of movement, and I don't have to completely define that. We don't have to know exactly what that is. It's just helping to move the eye around the entire piece. And this gives me an opportunity to add, since I've got this on my spatula, to add a little bit of an extra highlight there on the nose, and then look for where else can I add highlights, because I'm going to need to add some highlights here on this side of the face. So I'm going to take and add a tiny bit of orange into that white, and we're going to see what happens if I come in here and I begin to carve that out just a little bit.
Awesome.
And now the interesting thing about, I don't like that mark there. So again, this is what's so great about acrylic is I can come in here, I wipe away the mark that I don't like, and I keep the ones that are actually working.
So before you go on, tell me what are the next 2 or 3 steps you're going to make before we take a break?
I'm going to continue to add some of the light in this side of the face, going to maybe add a touch of light here on the eyelid, coming down the chin, and then see if it needs to have a little bit more light down here. And I'm basing that off of what's happening, what I'm adding right now. So every step is going to influence the next step.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to be right back. Our guest today is Chantel Barber, and she's teaching you how to take a photograph and make a really dynamic, beautiful painting from it. Chantel has this incredible video that we produced a couple years ago, maybe a few years ago now, painting from photos. And so you get to see the whole start of the painting and the whole process, how to make them emotional. And so that's available at painttube.tv. Just check that out. Also, just want you to know about something that's coming up right away. All right, Chantel is going to be teaching on Acrylic Live, and so you want to make sure that you come for that. We've got a lot of great acrylic painters. Okay, now back to Chantel Barber. Here we go.
All right. So what I'm going to do now is soften these edges. I lay down that light. I'm using a very tiny goat's hair brush, and I'm softening those edges because I want a combination of these darker, or not darker. I want to have some strokes that are more of the texture, heavier, a lot of paint, but then soften those edges as I'm going around. So I'm adding this here, and then I'm going to look and see where do I need to add softer edges. I'm going to come in here and tap in a little bit of light there on that eyelid. Take just a tiny bit off. What's great about this brush is I can come and I can soften. And as I soften these, I'm thinking about directional. I'm thinking about the shape of the face. How would this stroke come around the shape of the face? So I'm looking at it and I'm realizing I want to come around this way. So I'm going to pull my paintbrush across there. I'm going to start to pull this down a little bit. And you can see how that already makes a big difference with the way this face is shaped. I'm going to
Makes
come
the
in
light
here.
also on the other side feel darker.
Yes, and that's the other great thing to keep in mind. Everything you do is going to affect everything else in your painting. So if you are bumping up this light, that's going to make this look darker. And sometimes we forget about that. And so we will be painting along and we'll feel like, well, this isn't dark enough. I've got to go darker. And then again, we fall into that pit where I've got this so dark, it's gone very drab. And here's the interesting thing. If you use all of your bright lights and all of your darkest darks from the very beginning, you have nowhere else to go. You can't bump this up anymore.
All right. So Kay Sweeney is asking, what did you use to thin the acrylic paint?
I used it's an open thinner, and it's specifically done for the open acrylic. So you
Open
want to
acrylic's
use,
brand, everybody, and
yes.
it's a slow drying acrylic. And you don't use a slow drying acrylic all the time, though.
No, I am just using this to add kind of what I like to call the icing on the cake. I mainly work with the heavy body acrylic. That's my go-to acrylic, but the open lets me do some of these softer uh, effects, which is what I need at this point in the painting. And so I've just, even
Oh,
the
I'm sorry.
tiniest mark.
Another question. I'm sorry. A YouTube user says, can you use high flow acrylics instead of acrylics? I assume that's what you showed, the acrylic inks.
So your high flow is going to be your acrylic ink. You can use those. A
Right.
lot of, now the acrylic ink is going to have, it's going to have a lot more viscosity and it's going to be thinner. So what I mean by that is a lot more transparency. If
Okay.
I want, when you think about light and dark, what I like to think about is this. I like my darks to have some transparency here. I want my light to have more of that opaque feel that's going on. If you're going to use an acrylic ink, you're not going to have as much of the opaque feel. It's going to be very transparent, which is great if you want to create glazes.
So somebody on here says, I've painted for years in acrylic and I never knew about spatulas. Wow. See, you can learn
They're a
something new
game
every day. That's why you
changer.
got to come to Acrylic Live, because there's going to be
Yes.
so many different things taught that you never realized.
The spatulas are a game changer. And even up here, I can take this and bump up, some of these beautiful light passages and make them nice and chunky with that paint. So as it
The spatulas
dries,
are kind of like a palette knife, but you have a different angle on them because of the way the handle works. So
you
you can
do
control
have,
it a little bit more.
well, the other way I like to think of it is this. A palette knife, because it's metal and it's sharp, it doesn't have the flexibility.
Right.
It's going to create harder edges. They're not going to be as soft. They're not going to rather disappear into one another. Now, here's what I like to do with the palette knife, though, is come in here and pick up bits of those edges.
Nice.
And see, I can run back into it and vary that edge. So it's not going to be a hard edge. It's going to disappear. And you can do that with the open acrylic because you have more time. It's not drying so fast. So I'm using a combination of the palette knife and the spatula to get some of these different effects. Since they've put that beautiful color up there, I can come down and on this side, I can apply some of that same color, and I'm still using the same spatula I used before, but now I'm going to go and adjust that stroke. And to me, a lot of this is about the mark making. It's about creating unique strokes, marks. So here's another tip I love to use. I'm not very happy with how that looks. So I always ask myself a lot of questions when I'm painting. What can I do to make it feel like it's better? So I'm going to take my open thinner, going to put it on a paper towel, blue shop paper towel, and I'm going to lift up parts of this. And once again, it's going to create some unique edges that I can then build on. And let me move this around. And I can do the same thing with adding some white paint back into that. So what I'm going to do is put more of the thinner on this. We're going to grab some of the white, and I'm going to work those two together as I'm creating some unique edges here on this side.
So there's a question, can you use open acrylics over heavy-bodied acrylics?
Yes, I love to be able to mix.
And can you, if you use that medium, can you use that like a glaze? Like a thin glaze?
You can use the medium like a thin glaze. So, and that works really well. So here is the heavy body back on the spatula. I can work that in over what I just put down, which was the open acrylic. And it also works with that thinner that I put down with the open acrylic. The thinner does help create a beautiful glaze. And what I'm going to do is show you on this side up here. Let's go ahead and do that. See how we can create a glaze.
Oh, how accommodating. Thank you.
So I'm going to grab I do tend to use a lot of paper towels when I'm creating these effects, but they're really wonderful. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll put a little bit of water on first, then I'll go ahead and put my thinner right into the paper towel. And what I want to do over on this edge is create a little bit of a glaze with some ultramarine blue. So it's just pure ultramarine blue.
What?
And I'm going to just go over this. And you can see how that has darkened this up here with that. It's caught just enough of the paint.
You're blowing our mind.
But it's not too solid. And that's how I can get away with going that dark. I can do that because if this was heavy solid, so what do I mean when I say solid? Well, if I put some of this directly onto that's solid. You don't want that to be up here. It's
Right.
going to just create not only a hard edge, but it's not going to have the depth of the shadows. So that's another thing to keep in mind. When you're painting something and you're using a reference, a photograph, you have to remember that the darks in the photograph are going to feel very black, almost like a black hole. They're not going to have the same beautiful life that shadows have when you're actually looking at a person in front of you.
Okay,
And you
somebody's
don't want to
asking
lose
if you
that.
can use polymer polymer instead of thinner?
I have not done that.
All right.
That's a great question. It's not something that I've worked with myself. But you know, I will say this, I'm always experimenting. And I find that that's the other thing that's really cool about working with acrylic. There's so many different ways that you can continue to experiment. And what I find is to try as much of the laying different paint textures down, working with both open and heavy body acrylic, working with your brushes. So I like to have hog's hair brush, working with your catalyst blades, and not being afraid to try something. Because let's say that it's an absolute disaster. You look at your painting and you think, oh no, what have I done? There are so many great ways that you can get it back to what was there before. You can sand parts of this down with a little fine sanding sponge. You can take your paper towel and put some of your liquid on it, and you can actually scratch back into it. So for example, I just put some color up here. Well, let's say I didn't like that. I could scratch back in and pull enough of that up to where I can get pretty much back to what I had before if I
Yep.
continue to do that. So you have so much versatility and flexibility when using this medium. Nothing has to stay exactly the way it is. You can continue to, and that's what gives you the freedom, in my opinion. You have freedom because it's not this feeling of, oh no, what if I put this stroke down and I ruin my painting? You know, that is when you get that deer in the headlight moment. If you're
That's
so
when that happens with
concerned,
watercolor.
yes.
Can't
And
change
we
it.
don't want that. We don't want to feel like we can't change things or move it around. It's more freeing if you can move it around. And the acrylic is letting me come here. And because this is already dry, see now I can work some of that pale transparent orange, and I can go over. And actually, in a way, this is kind of a bit of a glazing. It's letting what was underneath come through so that now you almost get the feeling like the hair is moving this way, giving some great directional movement, great strokes. And it's about these layers that I'm creating. I'm coming back in here and I'm creating layers by putting paint on top of paint. Almost like the layers if you were weaving fabric.
One thing I love about acrylics is I've got so sick of traveling with oils because of the oils in the airplanes, and also there's toxicity issues, and so a lot of artists now that paint in oils are switching to acrylics for travel. I know I am.
They're great for that. They really
Also, I
are.
use gouache too, but
They are extremely versatile. They're great for traveling. They've got, you can go thick or thin with the paints. You can move things around. My other thing that I really love to do with it is come back in and even with just after this is dried, using a palette knife, I can cut back into it, scrape parts of it off with using the palette knife.
huh.
So that, you know, if you were working in oil paint, here, let's show by moving some of that off so you can see. If you're working with oil paint, you would scrape in when it's wet, and you could use your palette knife to create lines or directional movement. You can still do that with the acrylic, even when it's dry. And that is a really great effect that you can get because, again, so much of an acrylic painting is what to do with these edges. And edges are a major part of creating this sense of vitality and movement that's happening in any piece that you're working with. And if you can control those edges, you're going to be able to create pieces that have so much movement and vitality in them. So I've been
Edges make a
looking,
painting.
they do. As I'm watching this develop, I've been looking at this area here. So Here's an interesting thing that we can do to add a little bit more of a feeling of light into this and have it not read as too dark. I can take acrylic ink again, and we're going to go with cadmium red light.
I just want to mention that something I discovered is that when I was a kid, I painted with acrylic paint and everything was shiny and plasticky. The painting formulas have changed so dramatically since then.
They have tremendous. So just by adding some of that red in there, you can see how that completely changes it. And it's bringing light into it. Now, if I get too much, I'm able to adjust this by lifting just enough up so that I've got this beautiful reflected light that's right there. It's gone back over the white that I laid down earlier, and you get these incredible little nuances of, of color and marks that come together that's helping to bring the eye around. And that is something that can be created by working with the layers. Well, you can't always have layers if you're waiting for something to dry.
Right.
And with the acrylic, you're not waiting for it to dry. And I even like to come back in with my paper towel and add just enough of some varying strokes to bring interest to an area. And I can come in with larger brushes too. There are points where I feel like this is a great time to add a larger paintbrush into the piece, and I'm put some of the open acrylic back over the top. So here's the interesting thing. When you add open acrylic over what I just did, and there's a little bit of moisture, because I moved that, I lifted it up with the water, it tends to, I'm trying to think of how to say it, it bubbles a little bit in a good way, and it creates some interesting marks that would be almost as if you were putting turpentine with oil paint. And it's just a fabulous effect that you can achieve by doing that.
Awesomeness.
You can mix your heavy body with your open acrylic on the same paintbrush. And that's what I've just done. I've gone ahead and mixed both of them. And what I want to do now is start to, with a little bit of a lighter touch, start to feather some of the, more of a suggestion of skin into this side. Another way to control your paint when you're working with your acrylic is how heavy or light a touch you have. So sometimes, say I've had more of a heavier touch there. It doesn't always work to do that. What I find is if I take that down, what happens now, if I come back, I wipe just a little bit of that paint off, and I feather in with just a lighter touch. And what you can see is that that's how you can get a lot of these really soft, subtle transitions when you're laying down your paint. Is not only how hard you're pushing on your paintbrush, but also this idea of just feathering some of these strokes. And a lot of that comes from not having too much moisture or water in with your paint. So I do not use a lot of water in with my acrylic paint, especially with the heavy body. If you've got water in your paint, water on your brush, water on, your palette, and you've got so much water that you're not able to control your brush strokes, everything starts becoming very wimpy, and it's literally dripping off of your painting surface. And all this great texture here that's underneath is actually adding to the paint, the strokes that I'm putting on the top of it right now. So another great tip when you're working with something like this is to take a painting that you painted and you don't like, you sand it down, and then you start building back on top of it. And that's going to already give you incredible texture and different strokes, different opaque and transparent passages that then are going to let you build on those.
Fun, 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 fun. Play, play, play. That's what we do all day, day, day. We just play with paintings.
And that's what it's all about, though, because if you take yourself, you want to know how to do things. Of course, we've spent time studying our values, studying our light, but you also have to have the ability to let yourself experience the medium and play and lay strokes down and just let them go and not come back and constantly get very tight and just do little, tiny strokes like that. That is going to tighten your painting and you're going to lose this sense of movement and energy. You want to loosen up. And another way to force yourself to loosen up is to use a larger brush. And come back in. We're going to add a little bit of light up here. A little bit light over on this side. Even just tapping the canvas can give you some really cool effects. Now, every time I add light, I have to watch because it's drying darker. The open acrylic does not dry darker, but the heavy body
Really?
acrylic is going to dry one value darker.
Huh.
So that if you mix the two, you have to keep that in mind, that what's going to happen is the open acrylic is going to hold its value. The heavy body acrylic is going to dry one value darker.
So you got to get a half value.
Yes. And that ends up actually being a really fun thing to do that and just kind of play with that and see how it all works.
Hello, Mexico.
Don't use too many small brushes when you're working on a painting like this. Force yourself to go with bigger brushes. Again, going back with these catalyst blades, looking for ways that you can add a lot of color and different marks with them. I'm going to come in and up here, I'm going to add some more with the open acrylic.
Oh, thick.
And I'm going thicker at this point. I like to save my thicker strokes as I'm moving towards the finishing of a painting.
You're like John Singer Sargent.
Yeah.
Put those big strokes in at the end.
Yes, get them in at the end because at this point, see, you know your placement. You have a really good idea of where everything is. And this is your opportunity to go bold once you have the bones of the painting down. We're back to this idea of what am I going to do with these edges, these transitional edges? And there's several different ways that I can approach this. And I've shown you with the catalyst blade using the palette knife. I can also come in and just with a soft hog's hair bristle brush, I can soften
Nice.
those edges.
Bonjour, France. Welcome. I love it when people tune in from all over the world.
It is exciting.
I mean, we have this whole community that we may have differences in other ways, but we're all together for art.
We are. Art is a great way to connect with each other. It's a way for us to work through so many wonderful experiences, the energy.
What's really
It's,
cool is that people attend something like Acrylic Live. They make friends in the chats and in the breakout rooms and the cocktail parties. And then they end up hanging out together, taking vacations together, stuff like that. It's very neat. A lot of friendships have been made.
I agree. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. And acrylic is such an incredible medium that has so much versatility with this, so many different effects you can achieve. And the great part is that you've got something like this, it's easy to transport your painting when you're in those finishing stages. It's going to dry faster. It's going to allow you to varnish it sooner, which is
No,
another
no more
really
panel
nice plus.
carriers. Just throw them in your suitcase. They're dry.
They're dry. And it lets you come back in and decide if you want to make changes. And I know I'm repeating myself, but that's one of my favorite things about this medium is if I want to make changes, I can do that because it is already dry and I can continue to just layer upon layer.
Before we go, which is not yet, but before you go, maybe at the last minute, you'll show your palette.
Yes.
All right. That'll be
Of
good.
course, it's quite messy now, but I shall be happy to do that. And I'm working with two palettes. Actually, what is our time?
Oh, we're gonna wrap up in just a few minutes, maybe 3 or 4
Okay,
minutes.
let me do that then. Let me show
Okay.
you my palette because this is a great time to do that.
All right. Get a
Grab a
little
hold of
drying
this.
time in.
So this is the heavy body acrylic. It's simply on a stay wet palette. And what I mean by that is it's got a sponge underneath. I can show you that it's a piece of interfacing foam that I'm using as my sponge. The palette paper on top is bringing the moisture up from
Is that
underneath from
special
that
palette
sponge.
paper made for the Stay Wet palette, or can you
It
use any palette?
is.
Yeah.
You cannot use any palette paper.
All
That
right.
is such an important point. I'm glad you brought that up
That's very
because,
smart of them.
yeah, it's got to be a palette paper. It cannot have the plastic coating, or what happens is it won't pull that moisture from
Yeah.
underneath. However, if you're working with the or the open acrylic, you can use just a plastic palette. This one happens to be gray, and it will keep these acrylic paints, workable for several hours at a time. And then what I do is I seal it up with a lid. And so I've got both of those palettes that I like to use. Um, my colors are, this one shows better some of the colors that I've got for today's is just some neutral grays, white, cad yellow light. I've got some cad oranges there. This is the transparent cad orange. That's the just the regular cad orange, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, some transparent red iron oxide, burnt umber, and then I have some greens. I've got chromium oxide green deep. I have permanent green, and the other one I think is anise green, which has got a little bit more of a yellow to it.
Cool. Thank you.
Now, depending on where you live and your humidity level, your sponge is going to need, either more water or less water in order to keep your paints workable. So what I like to do, kind of my rule of thumb, is I like the paint to be as if it was coming, I'm going to put some on my palette knife so you can see, coming out of the tube. I try to keep it that consistency throughout my painting process.
Oh, Sal said he uses tracing paper instead of the expensive Stay Wet palette paper.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's nice. That's a good idea.
Yeah. And it's figuring out what works best for you. And that is something that I'm always going back and exploring, what kind of things work well for a sponge, such as that interfacing, that foam interfacing, what kind of palette paper you can use that's going to soak up that moisture rather than letting it, if it's got that plastic coating, it's not going to soak up the moisture. And those are the things that make your painting experience so much nicer.
Yeah. Awesomeness. You have been doing a great job today. Everybody give her thumbs up and applause. Give her a positive comment. You deserve it. Do
Well, I
you
love,
use any retardants with acrylics?
no, the only one is the open thinner. Anything else I don't use. I
Okay.
just use the paint brushes and water. I do wrap my brushes in paper towels when I'm using the heavy body acrylic, because that's going to keep it moist and workable. I'm not putting it in water until I'm done with my painting session.
Otherwise, you get too much water, then you get a lot of soup.
Yes, and that I believe that that is the paint consistency is one of the reasons why people get frustrated with the acrylic, because they're not getting the correct paint consistency. If
Oh,
you get good paint consistency, you're going to be able to do a lot. So if I can take my paint and I can put it up here and it's not dripping down, notice it's not coming down the spatula. This is what you want. If I take some paint that has been with the water too long, and let me grab some that you can see that it's starting to drip down like a bunch of goop. You
yeah.
really don't want it like that unless you're in a very, very dry climate and you're concerned that your paint is going to dry out too fast. Then you kind of go between the two.
Awesomeness. Well, this has been fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Why don't you come back on camera and
Right.
say hi to everybody so they get a chance to meet you. All they've seen is your, and let's say we're there for the opening. There we are.
Yes.
Terrific. Good, good, good. Well, this has been fun. Thank you, Chantel.
Well, I've loved being on here. I'm very passionate about this medium. I've used it. Good grief. If I go back in time, I think it's 1990 is when I started, and
Oh,
it, I'm not ever tired of it. I'm always finding new things that I love about it, new techniques, different tools that I use. This is just a phenomenal medium, and I would encourage everyone to try it. It will make you a better artist, no matter what medium you choose that's your favorite. Working in acrylic is going to help you with your values. It's going to make you a better artist overall.
have you decided yet what you're going to be teaching on Acrylic Live?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing what I call a portrait sketch, which is grabbing as much emotion and right to the point with minimal fussiness. So it's going to be a lot of sharing brush strokes, how you lay from beginning to end. I'm going to show you how I start off with putting it together and how I take it to that finished stage for more of a fresh portrait sketch.
That's exciting. Well, it's just a little tiny under a month away. So we're excited
Yeah.
to have you. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Well, thank you for hosting. I've loved being on Art School Live today.
We love having you. And we'll tell everybody to visit your website. We put it in the chat, but we'll put it in there one more time.
All right, appreciate it.
And then go buy her demo from her. I think that'd be cool. Somebody needs to do that. All right. Thank you, Chantel.
Thanks so much.
All right. Bye-bye. Well, this has been fabulous. I want to tell you about one other thing that's happening, maybe a couple other things, but hang in there for just 1 second. We have an event coming up. Of course, we told you about Acrylic Live, and we're very excited about that. But we have something else you need to know about. You know what? I played that one already.
Every artist deserves a chance to discover what they're truly capable of. This is yours. Join the world's top painters for 5 days of immersive learning, creativity, and connection in the most picturesque regions of Lake Tahoe and Reno.
I enjoy the scenery, I enjoy the locations, and I enjoy meeting people.
With hands-on coaching, 5 stages, plus daily painting sessions and a community of passionate creators, you'll grow your skills like never before.
It's a wonderful experience. I mean, it's a wealth of information. I got personal instruction from 𝗄𝗶𝘁𝗵. Do you believe that? I'm so excited.
It's just awesome to hear other people talk about painting.
At PACE, you're not just learning, you're connecting. Build lifelong friendships with like-minded artists who share your passion. This is where ideas spark, creativity flourishes, and your next breakthrough begins.
I would say just go for it.
As long as I'm living and able, I will come to these. Just sign up and go.
Don't wait, seats are limited. Join us at the Plein Air Convention and Expo in Lake Tahoe and Reno. Secure your spot now.
This is not something you want to miss. Plein air convention is a phenomenon. It's so cool. Okay, last but not least, we have a free gift for you. It's a 2-hour sample video of some of the incredible professionally produced things that we've done. It's 97 Incredible Art Secrets. Just go to 97artsecrets.com/ASL. I want to thank Chantel for today. It was terrific. We learned a lot. See, this is the thing. You try to do this stuff on your own and you're making all these blobs and all these problems and you're not learning. You're just kind of stuck. And you go to Acrylic Live and you're like, oh, there's like 500 new ways of approaching this. I had never known that. We got some of the top masters in acrylic, including some top masters who also are doing oil, like 𝗄𝗵𝘁𝗵, and he's doing acrylic when he paints travels now, because it's just so much easier for him. And he has figured out how to make his acrylics look just like his oils so that you can't tell the difference. And of course, that's fabulous. And so Chantel has figured that out as well. So anyway, we hope that you'll come. We're thankful that you're here today. Make sure you give a thumbs up and applause to Chantel. And thanks again. We really appreciate you being here. We're every weekday at 12 noon. My name is 𝗖𝗵𝘁𝗵𝗵. I'm the publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. I love doing this for you guys. I love it when you guys connect, and I love it when you come to our events and we hang out together. So we'll see you there. Have a great day. Bye-bye.